Nero Wolfe and the Secret at St. Regis. It was a Wednesday in late October when the trouble started, which seemed appropriate since Wednesdays have always struck me as the most treacherous day of the week, far enough from the weekend to breed resentment, not close enough to inspire hope. I was in the office going through the morning mail, separating the bills from the begging letters, when Fritz Brenner appeared in the doorway with his worried face on. In his hand was a cream-colored envelope that looked expensive enough to contain either a wedding invitation or a ransom note. "Archie," he said, "this just arrived by messenger." The young man insisted I sign for it personally and would not say who sent it. I took it from him. The envelope was heavy stock, watermarked, addressed in fountain pen to Nero Wolfe Confidential, with no return address. The postmark was Manhattan, dated yesterday. "Where's himself?" I asked. "In the plant rooms. It is nearly 11, so he will be down shortly." I held the envelope up to the light, saw nothing illuminating, and set it on Wolfe's desk. Through the window, October rain was making a grey wash of West 35th Street. From somewhere in the house came the soft click of claws on hardwood. Probably Diana, who had the most restless soul of our 5 Dobermans and liked to patrol even when there was nothing to patrol against. At precisely 11 o'clock, the sound of the elevator announced Wolfe's descent from the orchids. I heard him speak to Caesar in the hallway, his voice carrying that particular rumbling affection he reserved for the dogs, and occasionally for a perfectly prepared meal, and then he entered the office. Nero Wolfe is not a small man. He weighs 1/7 of a ton and moves with the careful deliberation of a man who knows his own gravity. He was carrying a spray of Oncidium verrucosum, golden and delicate, which he set in the vase on his desk before settling into his custom-made chair with a small grunt of satisfaction. "Good morning, Archie." "Good morning. Mail's routine except for that." I pointed at the envelope. His eyes, which can look sleepy or sharp depending on his mood, moved to it without enthusiasm. He picked it up, examined the outside, then used his letter opener, a thin piece of silver that had once belonged to someone famous whose name I forget, to slice it open. Inside was a photograph and a single sheet of matching paper. Wolfe extracted both and studied the photograph first. After a long moment, he handed it to me. It showed a man in his middle 50s, distinguished looking in a tuxedo, standing before the Fifth Avenue entrance of the St. Regis Hotel. The photo had been torn, roughly, by the look of it, leaving a ragged edge on the right side where presumably another person had been removed. The man's expression was caught mid-smile, the kind of professional warmth that society people cultivate like orchids. "Know him?" I asked. "No." I looked at the note. Written in the same elegant hand as the address, it contained exactly one sentence. "He knows what happened in room 9130. I read it twice, then looked at Wolfe. Dramatic, also vague. "You want me to find out who he is?" "I want you to throw it away." "Come on. Mysterious envelope, cryptic message, expensive stationery. This has all the hallmarks of a paying client. It has all the hallmarks of someone's idea of theatre." He picked up the spray of orchids and examined it with considerably more interest than he'd shown the photograph. I am not a man who responds to stage directions. Maybe they're not stage directions. Maybe they're a warning. Then let whoever is being warned take appropriate action. I leaned back in my chair. Through the doorway, I could see Mars lying in the hallway with his massive head on his paws, watching us with the patient intensity that all the Dobermans shared. They'd been with us since they were puppies 3 years ago, a gift from a grateful client who'd wanted Wolfe to have proper security after someone had taken a shot at him. The client had been right to worry, and the dogs had become as much a part of the Brownstone as Fritz's cooking or Wolfe's orchids. "You know what I think," I said. "I rarely do. I think someone is dead or about to be, and whoever sent this wants you involved, but is afraid to come right out and say so. That means they're either scared of someone or protecting someone. Your reasoning is a monument to speculation. Should I try to identify the man in the photo?" Wolfe was silent for a moment, his eyes half closed. Then, "No, file it. If someone wishes to engage my services, they know where to find me. And if the man in the photo turns up dead, then Inspector Kramer will have the pleasure of solving it without my interference." I should have known better than to argue. When Wolfe had made up his mind, changing it required either leverage or catastrophe, and sometimes both. I dropped the photo and note into the folder for unresolved correspondence and went back to the mail. But I'd seen something in that photograph that Wolfe had missed, or more likely had seen and chosen to ignore. In the background, barely visible in the hotel's glass doors, was a reflection. A woman in what looked like a dark coat. Her face turned away, but with one detail that caught the light. Gloves, crimson-colored, raised as if adjusting a hat. I said nothing about it then, but I made a mental note to have Lon Cohen at the Gazette take a look when I saw him for lunch. Lon had a memory for faces that made him valuable to newspapermen and detectives alike. The rain continued. Caesar padded into the office and settled near Wolfe's desk with a soft huff of contentment. Wolfe opened the beer that Fritz brought him, one of his 2 allotments before lunch, and picked up his current book, a biography of Alexander Hamilton that he'd been working through with glacial thoroughness. I watched him read, utterly content in his fortress, and wondered how long it would take for the trouble to find us. As it turned out, not long at all. The call came at 8:30 the next morning, which was Thursday. No, wait, this started Wednesday, so the call was Thursday. Strike that. The call came Thursday morning, pulling me from a dream about a redhead and a racetrack that I was sorry to leave. I answered the phone in my bedroom, on the 3rd ring. Goodwin Residence, Goodwin speaking. Archie, it's Lon. Lon Cohen's voice had the slightly frayed quality of a man who'd been up all night, which for a newspaperman was more common than not. You asked me about a photo yesterday. The distinguished gentleman in the monkey suit. You got something? His name's Elliot Varnell. Art dealer, high-end stuff, old money mixed with new taste. Has a gallery on Madison Avenue, and a reputation for finding pieces nobody else can find. Had, I said, knowing where this was going. Yeah, had. They found him this morning in a room at the St. Regis Hotel. Room 913 to be specific. Apparent suicide, sleeping pills and scotch. His wife identified the body an hour ago. I sat up in bed, suddenly very awake. Through my window, I could see dawn breaking over Manhattan, turning the rain-washed city the color of old silver. What time did he die? Medical examiner's preliminary estimate is between midnight and 3 a.m. Why? When did you say they found him? 6:30. Maid went in to turn down the bed. Apparently he'd requested late service, and there he was, sprawled on the couch in his evening clothes with an empty pill bottle on the table. Did he leave a note? Not that I've heard. But Archie, here's the interesting part. When I started asking around about Varnell, 3 different people told me the same thing. He didn't drink. Something about a liver condition. Hadn't touched alcohol in 5 years. I thought about that. A man who doesn't drink, found dead with scotch in his system. The police buying suicide? For now. But Inspector Kramer's handling it personally, which means he smells something wrong even if he can't name it yet. Thanks, Lon. I owe you 1. You owe me about 40. But who's counting? What's your interest in Varnell? Professional curiosity. Uh-huh. Well, if your professional curiosity turns into something printable, remember who called you first. I hung up and sat there for a moment thinking. Then I got dressed, went downstairs, and found Wolfe already at breakfast in the dining room. The table was laden with Fritz's Thursday morning offerings: poached eggs, grilled kidneys, toast points with anchovy butter, and fresh blackberry preserves. Apollo lay near Wolfe's chair, ears pricked forward, watching his master eat with the focused attention of a theologian, contemplating divine mysteries. Good morning, Wolfe said without looking up from his eggs. Morning. The man in the photo is dead. That got his attention. He set down his fork with precision and looked at me. I told him what Lon had reported. When I finished, Wolfe picked up his coffee cup and drank, his eyes distant. Suspicious circumstances, he said finally. Extremely. A man who doesn't drink found dead with scotch. A cryptic message about what he knew. A photograph delivered the day before he died. The photograph does not prove foreknowledge of his death. It proves only that someone wished to draw my attention to Mr. Varnell. Successfully, as it happens. I am not drawn. I am informed, which is different. You're also curious. I am nothing of the sort. I helped myself to toast and considered my approach. Wolfe is moved by 3 things: money, intellectual challenge, and occasionally, when the moon is right and the orchids are blooming properly, a sense of moral outrage. I didn't have money to offer him yet, but I might manage the other 2. Here's what I think, I said. Someone knew Varnell was going to die. They sent you that envelope as either a warning he ignored or a test you failed. I do not fail tests. I do not consent to take. Fine, call it whatever you want. But now Varnell is dead in the exact room mentioned in that note, and whoever sent the envelope knows you received it. If the police find out about it, Kramer's going to want to know why you didn't tell him immediately. That landed. Wolfe hates complications with the police, particularly when they involve questions about his own actions or inactions. I received an anonymous note about a man I did not know, he said. I am not obligated to report every piece of unsolicited correspondence to the authorities. True, unless it becomes evidence in a murder investigation, at which point your obligation becomes a problem. You assume it was murder. So do you, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. Minerva appeared in the doorway, her stance alert, and a moment later Fritz came in with fresh coffee. Excuse me, Fritz said. Archie, there is a woman at the front door. She will not give her name, but she says she must see Mr. Wolfe about a matter of life and death. Wolfe and I exchanged glances. Describe her, Wolfe said. Elegant, perhaps 40 years old. She is wearing black and gloves of red leather. I felt something cold walk down my spine. The woman from the photograph's reflection. Show her in, Wolfe said. She came into the office like someone entering a church, hesitant but determined, aware she was crossing a threshold that mattered. The crimson gloves were the first thing you noticed, then the rest of her dark hair swept back in a chignon, a face that had been beautiful and still was in a drawn, haunted way, and eyes that looked like she hadn't slept since Varnell died. Probably because she hadn't. Mr. Wolfe, she said. Her voice was low, controlled, expensive. Thank you for seeing me. Wolfe had risen a fraction of an inch from his chair, acknowledging her presence before settling back down. Please sit. Would you like coffee? No, thank you. She took the red leather chair, perched on its edge rather than settling back. Her gloves remained on. My name is Marina Varnell. My husband was found dead this morning at the St. Regis Hotel. The police say it was suicide. It wasn't. Wolfe regarded her steadily. Why not? Because Elliot would never kill himself. He had everything to live for, his gallery, his collection, his work. And because, she paused, her fingers tightening on her purse. Because he was murdered, to keep him silent about something he discovered, something dangerous. What did he discover? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. He said it was safer if I didn't know. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she stopped, gathering herself. 3 weeks ago, Elliot came home from a private sale looking like he'd seen a ghost. He was part of a collector's society, wealthy men who acquire rare art, sometimes pieces with questionable provenance. That night, he'd seen something at a meeting. He wouldn't say what, but he told me that if anything happened to him, I should come to you. I glanced at Wolfe. Did he say why you specifically? He said you were the only detective in New York who couldn't be bought or frightened. He said you were incorruptible and arrogant, and those were the two qualities he needed. Wolfe's eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. A fair assessment. Continue. 2 days ago, Elliot received a telephone call. I didn't hear the conversation, but afterward he was pale. He said he had to meet someone at the St. Regis to settle something. He made me promise that if he didn't come home, I would come to you immediately and tell you to look into room 913. Yet you didn't come until after his death. I was afraid. I'm still afraid. She looked at me, then back at Wolfe. Mr. Wolfe, my husband was murdered by someone powerful enough to make it look like suicide. Someone who knows about the St. Regis, about room 913, about whatever Elliot discovered. I need you to find out who and why. I'll pay whatever you require. Wolfe was silent for a long moment. Through the window, I could see that the rain had stopped, leaving the city washed and grey. Caesar padded into the room and settled near Marina's chair. She looked down at him, startled. He won't hurt you, I said. He's just curious. She reached down slowly and let Caesar sniff her gloved hand. He accepted the gesture, then lay down with his head on his paws, apparently satisfied with her credentials. Mrs. Varnell, Wolfe said, you have not told me everything. It wasn't a question. Marina's shoulders stiffened. I've told you what I know about my husband's death, but not what you know about his life. You mentioned a collector's society. What were they collecting? Art, primarily European pieces from the war period. Stolen art. Some of it, yes. Pieces that were looted by the Nazis, recovered after the war, and sold through private channels. Elliot always said he verified provenance, but I knew that sometimes the provenance was creative. Names, Wolfe said. I need the names of the other members of this society. Marina hesitated. They were very discreet. I only met a few of them. There was Horace Caldwell, who owns department stores, Gerald Ashford, a banker, and someone Elliot called the Russian, though I don't think he was actually Russian. Elliot never mentioned his real name. What about the meetings? Where were they held? Different locations, private clubs, galleries, sometimes hotel suites. The St. Regis was a favorite. They felt it was discreet. Room 9130, I said. Marina nodded. Sometimes. It was registered to a company name, used for private viewings and negotiations. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his fingers interlaced across his middle. Mrs. Varnell, your husband's death occurred sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. Where were you during those hours? Her face went white. You think I think nothing. I am gathering facts. Answer the question. I was home, in bed, alone. Her voice was tight with anger and hurt. Elliot called me at 11:30 to say he'd be late. That was the last time I spoke to him. Can anyone verify your whereabouts? No. Our housekeeper had the evening off. I was alone. Wolfe nodded slowly. Your husband telephoned you at 11:30. What exactly did he say? Marina closed her eyes, remembering. He said the meeting was taking longer than expected. He sounded strange, excited, maybe, or nervous. He said he'd found something important, something that would change everything. He told me he loved me, and that no matter what happened, I should remember that. And you let him go. What was I supposed to do? Lock him in the house? Her voice broke again, and this time tears slid down her face. She pulled off one crimson glove and wiped at them impatiently. I should have stopped him. I should have known something was wrong. You couldn't have stopped him, I said, handing her my handkerchief. If a man's determined to walk into trouble, you can't chain him to the radiator. She managed a small, bitter smile. Thank you. Wolfe watched this exchange with his usual detachment. Mrs. Varnell, I will take your case on one condition. You will tell me everything you know or suspect, holding nothing back, regardless of how it might reflect on your husband or yourself. If you conceal information from me, I will withdraw immediately. Do you accept these terms? Yes. My fee is $25,000. She didn't blink. Acceptable. Very well. Archie will prepare a contract. You will provide him with a complete list of your husband's associates, his gallery records for the past year, and any correspondence related to the Collectors Society. I will also need access to your husband's apartment. Of course. One more question. Did you send me an envelope yesterday containing your husband's photograph and a note about room 913? Marina looked genuinely puzzled. No, I didn't know about you until after Elliot died. Why? Because someone wanted me involved before the murder occurred. That suggests either a guilty conscience seeking exposure or a clever killer establishing an alibi. He looked at her steadily. Which do you think it was? I don't know, she whispered, but I'm going to find out. After she left, with promises to return with documents and payment, I sat down at my desk and looked at Wolfe. Well, I said. Well, what? Do you think she killed him? I think she's frightened and grieving, which means she's either innocent or an exceptional actress. Time will clarify which. He stood up with a grunt. I'm going to the plant rooms. You will call Saul, Fred, and Ori. I want complete surveillance on Horace Caldwell and Gerald Ashford, beginning immediately. I also want you to visit the St. Regis this afternoon and examine room 913. The police will have it sealed. Then be creative. You usually are. He walked out, Caesar following. I heard the elevator start its ascent and sat there thinking about Marina Varnell's haunted eyes and crimson gloves. Someone had sent Wolfe that envelope before Elliot died. Someone who knew what was going to happen. That meant either the killer or a witness. And if it was a witness, why not simply come forward? Unless they were afraid of winding up like Varnell, dead in a hotel room with scotch they didn't drink. I picked up the phone and started making calls. The St. Regis Hotel rises from Fifth Avenue like a monument to money that doesn't need to apologize for itself. Built in the early 1900s by the Astor family, it's the kind of place where doormen remember your name after one visit and forget it completely if you can't afford to be remembered. I arrived at 3 o'clock that afternoon carrying a briefcase and wearing my second-best suit, expensive enough to get past the lobby, but not so expensive that I'd look like a mark. The rain had started again, a light mist that made the October afternoon feel like November. The lobby was all marble and mirrors, crystal chandeliers throwing fractured light across Persian carpets. A few well-dressed people moved through the space with the unhurried grace of those who never had to worry about train schedules or dinner reservations. In the corner, a pianist played something I didn't recognize, soft enough to add atmosphere without demanding attention. I'd called ahead using one of my collection of fake names. This time I was James Wheeler, attorney for the Varnell estate, and arranged a meeting with the hotel manager. He met me near the elevators, a trim man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of face that had perfected the art of looking sympathetic without actually feeling anything. "Mr. Wheeler," he said, extending a hand. "Malcolm Hartwell, general manager. I'm so sorry about Mr. Varnell, such a tragedy." "Indeed," I shook his hand. "I appreciate you making time on such short notice. The family is anxious to settle Mr. Varnell's affairs as quickly and quietly as possible. Of course, discretion is paramount at the St. Regis." He gestured toward the elevators. "Shall we go up?" Room 9113 was on the 9th floor, at the end of a hallway decorated with paintings that looked expensive enough to require insurance riders. Hartwell produced a key, then hesitated. "I should mention that the police were here until noon. They've released the scene, but they asked us not to disturb anything unnecessarily." "I'll be careful," I said. He opened the door. The room was a corner suite with windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. Elegant without being ostentatious. Cream-colored walls, dark wood furniture, a couch upholstered in burgundy velvet. On a side table, I could see the smudge of fingerprint powder around an empty scotch glass, and what had been a pill bottle, now presumably in police evidence bags. "Mr. Varnell checked in 3 days ago," Hartwell said, hovering in the doorway. "He requested this particular suite, as he often did." Often. He was a regular guest. Sometimes he'd reserve the room for private showings, artwork, estate pieces, that sort of thing. He was always very professional. I walked slowly through the room, taking my time. The couch where Varnell had died was positioned to face the windows. The scotch glass on the table was within easy reach. Everything looked exactly like a man who'd decided to end his life with pills and alcohol. Except, I knelt down and looked at the carpet beneath the couch. There was a small stain, darker than the surrounding fabric, that the police had marked with a tiny numbered tent. Wine, probably, or scotch spilled during Varnell's final moments. But here's what bothered me. The stain was on the wrong side of the table. If Varnell had been sitting on the couch drinking and knocked over his glass, the spill should have been closer to the table's edge, not behind it. Unless he'd thrown the glass, which suicide victims rarely do, or unless someone else had been in the room and knocked it over during a struggle. "Mr. Hartwell," I said, standing up, "did Mr. Varnell have any visitors while he was here?" "Not that I'm aware of, but I wouldn't necessarily know. Guests have considerable privacy." "What about the staff? Did anyone see or hear anything unusual?" Hartwell's expression became guarded. "I'm not sure I should discuss that without police authorization." I gave him my most reassuring smile, the one that implies discretion and legal authority in equal measures. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm trying to spare the Varnell family additional publicity. If there's something the staff noticed, I'd rather hear it from you than read about it in tomorrow's papers." He wavered, then sighed. "One of our maids mentioned seeing a woman near this room on Wednesday night. Around 11 o'clock, she was wearing a dark coat and hat, waiting in the hallway." "Did the maid recognize her?" "No. And before you ask, she didn't get a clear look at her face. The woman seemed to be waiting for someone, and when the maid came back from turning down another room 10 minutes later, she was gone." "What did the maid tell the police?" "Nothing. She didn't think it was important until after we found Mr. Varnell. By then the police had already finished their preliminary investigation and released the scene. I filed that away." "Anyone else see anything?" "Not that's been reported to me." I walked over to the windows and looked out. From this height, Fifth Avenue looked like a river of black umbrellas flowing between buildings. To the left, I could see the dim bulk of the public library. To the right, the spires of St. Patrick's Cathedral rose against the grey sky. "Tell me about the room's history," I said. "You mentioned Mr. Varnell used it regularly. For the past 2 years. Before that it was registered to a corporation, Bennett Acquisitions. They used it occasionally for business meetings. Do you know who ran Bennett Acquisitions?" "I'm afraid I don't. The registration was handled through a lawyer." I turned back to the room and noticed something I'd missed before. On the writing desk near the window was a small leather journal, overlooked by the police or left behind as insignificant. I walked over and picked it up. "That's Mr. Varnell's," Hartwell said. "Should I? I'll make sure the family gets it." I opened the journal. Most of the pages were filled with notes about art pieces, descriptions, valuations, provenance, details. But near the back, I found something interesting, a list of dates and initials. Sept 12, HC GAK. Sept 26, HC GAK. MR. Oct 3, full circle. Oct 8, MR wants verification. Dangerous. HC and GA were probably Horace Caldwell and Gerald Ashford, the collectors Marina had mentioned. K was unknown. MR might be the Russian. And what was full circle? The last entry was dated 2 days ago. They know about EM. Must act. Elysium mirror? The supposedly cursed artifact Marina had mentioned? I slipped the journal into my briefcase before Hartwell could change his mind about letting me take it. "One last question," I said. "Has anyone else asked about this room? Anyone showing unusual interest in Mr. Varnell's stay here?" Hartwell frowned. "Actually, yes. Yesterday afternoon, before Mr. Varnell's death, a man came to the desk asking if room 913 was occupied. When we told him yes, he asked if he could leave a message for the guest. We explained that we don't give out information about registered guests, and he left." "Did he leave a name?" "No, but my assistant described him as well-dressed, probably in his 60s, with an accent, possibly Russian or Eastern European." "The Russian? Did your assistant mention anything else about him?" "Only that he seemed very interested in whether Mr. Varnell was alone in the room or expecting visitors." I thanked Hartwell, promised to stay in touch, and took the elevator back down to the lobby. As I walked through the marble halls toward the exit, I had the uncomfortable sensation of being watched. I looked around casually, scanning faces, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the feeling persisted all the way out to Fifth Avenue. Back at the Brownstone, I found Wolfe in the office with all 5 Dobermans arranged around him like a security detail. Caesar at his heel, Mars and Apollo flanking the door, Minerva beneath the window, Diana near my desk. Their presence filled the room with an alert stillness that I'd learned to recognize as their version of maximum vigilance. "Trouble?" I asked, hanging up my coat. "Possibly. While you were gone, we had a visitor, a man who claimed to be a messenger, but refused to leave his package with Fritz. When I declined to see him, he became insistent. The dogs persuaded him to leave." "Description?" Fritz said he was approximately 60, well-dressed, with a pronounced accent. "Russian?" Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "How did you know?" I told him about my visit to the St. Regis, the journal, and Hartwell's information about the mysterious visitor asking about Varnell. When I finished, Wolfe was silent for a long time, his eyes closed. "It appears," he said finally, "that we have attracted attention somewhat faster than I anticipated. What do we do about it?" "We proceed carefully. Archie, call Saul and find out what he's learned about Caldwell and Ashford. Then call Inspector Kramer and inform him about the journal. I want the police aware of the Collectors' Society before someone else dies." "You think there'll be another murder?" "I think someone sent me a photograph and a warning before killing Varnell. That suggests either a conscience or a pattern. If it's the latter, then yes, I expect another death, and I would prefer it not be ours." He opened his eyes and looked at the dogs, who looked back with their usual steady attention. "Gentlemen," he said. He always called them that, even Diana and Minerva. "It appears we're going to earn our keep." Outside, the rain continued. I picked up the phone and started making calls, thinking about a man who didn't drink but died with scotch in his system, and a Russian who was very interested in who was alone in room 913. The case was getting complicated, which usually meant it was about to get dangerous. I was right about that, though not in the way I expected. Saul Panzer called back 20 minutes later with information that confirmed my suspicions and raised about a dozen new questions. Horace Caldwell is clean as far as criminal activity goes, Saul reported in his precise way. But financially, he's interesting. His department stores are losing money, have been for 3 years. He's been liquidating personal assets to keep them afloat, including some artwork. I talked to a contact at Sotheby's who said Caldwell sold a Modigliani last month for considerably less than market value. Desperate money. What about Ashford? Gerald Ashford is even more interesting. He's a senior vice president at Metropolitan Fidelity Bank, specializes in private wealth management. 3 months ago, the bank was investigated by federal regulators for possible money laundering. Nothing was proven, but Ashford was quietly reassigned to a less visible position. My source says the investigation focused on art transactions, specifically how the bank was facilitating the sale of pieces with questionable provenance. I whistled softly. So both our collectors have financial problems and connections to dubious art deals. That's not all. Fred's been watching Ashford's townhouse. This morning at 6 a.m., a car service picked him up and took him to a private airfield in New Jersey. He boarded a jet registered to a shell company and flew to Montreal. He returned 3 hours later carrying a briefcase that looked very empty going up and very full coming down. Money or merchandise? I'm guessing merchandise. Art's easier to move across borders than cash, and there's a thriving market in Montreal for pieces that need discreet new homes. I glanced at Wolfe, who was listening with his eyes half closed. Anything on the Russian? Nobody named Romanov. Volkov, Petrov, or any other obvious Russian surname appears in either Caldwell's or Ashford's known associates. But I did find something interesting. 10 years ago, there was a dealer in New York named Mikhail Komarov, who specialized in Eastern European art icons, Fabergé, that sort of thing. He was investigated by the FBI for trafficking in stolen religious artifacts, but disappeared before they could build a case. He'd be about 60 now.
Disappeared how?
The new identity and new life kind of disappeared. The FBI suspects he's still operating under an assumed name, but they've never been able to prove it. Wolfe opened his eyes. Archie, get the photograph that arrived with the note. I retrieved it from the file and handed it to him. He studied the torn edge with a magnifying glass for a long moment, then looked up. This photograph was not torn hastily. The edge is too clean, too deliberate. Whoever removed the second person from this image wanted Mr. Varnell isolated, made conspicuous. Why? To identify him as the target, I said, or to hide whoever was standing next to him. Precisely. Saul, are you still there? Yes, Mr. Wolfe. I need you to visit Marina Varnell. Ask her if she has any photographs of her husband from social occasions at the St. Regis. If she does, I want to see them immediately. On my way. After Saul hung up, I poured Wolfe a beer and myself a glass of milk. It was approaching 4 o'clock, and in another hour we'd be sitting down to Fritz's dinner. Through the window, I could see Diana on the front stoop, her dark shape silhouetted against the wet street. She was our early warning system, the one who sensed trouble before it arrived. You think the photograph shows Varnell with his killer? I said. I think it shows Varnell with someone whose identity is significant. Whether that person is the killer or merely knows the killer's identity remains to be determined. The phone rang. I answered it, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up and looked at Wolfe. That was Inspector Kramer. He wants to know why Mrs. Varnell hired us before her husband was 24 hours dead. And he wants to know about it now. Wolfe sighed. How inconvenient. Show him in when he arrives. He's not coming here. He wants us to meet him at his office in an hour. Out of the question. He said, if we don't come voluntarily, he'll send a squad car. On what grounds? Withholding evidence. Apparently someone told him we received information about Varnell before his death. We looked at each other. Someone had informed the police about the envelope, which meant someone knew it had been sent, which meant either Marina had mentioned it, unlikely, or whoever sent it was still watching us. Very well, Wolfe said heavily. Call Fred and Ori. I want them to accompany us, and bring Caesar and Mars. To police headquarters? I am not interested in Kramer's comfort. I am interested in our safety. If someone is orchestrating events to implicate us, I prefer to have witnesses and protection. An hour later, we pulled up to Center Street in Wolfe's custom-built Heron sedan, with Fred Durkin at the wheel. Wolfe emerged from the car with elaborate care, Caesar and Mars flanking him like honor guards. Several officers on the street stopped to stare at the sight of the massive detective, accompanied by 2 massive Dobermans, but nobody said anything. Kramer was waiting in his office, smoking a cigar, and looking like a man who'd been up for 30 hours straight. He took one look at the dogs and sighed, "I should have known." "Caesar and Mars are part of my security detail," Wolfe said, settling into the chair across from Kramer's desk. The dogs arranged themselves on either side, attentive and still. "If you object, we can continue this conversation at my office." "Fine. They bite anyone. You're paying the medical bills." Kramer stubbed out his cigar and pulled a folder from his desk. "Let's talk about Elliot Varnell." "Let's," Wolfe said. "According to Mrs. Varnell, you received an anonymous envelope containing her husband's photograph and a message about room 930 at the St. Regis. This was delivered the day before his death. Why didn't you report it?" "I receive a great deal of unsolicited correspondence, Inspector. Most of it is either promotional material or attempts to engage my services without proper payment. I saw no reason to trouble you with every mysterious note that arrives at my door, even when it references a specific room where a man later dies. At the time I received the envelope, no crime had been committed. I had no way of knowing whether the message was a warning, a threat, or merely someone's idea of drama." Kramer leaned back in his chair. "Let me tell you what I think happened. I think someone knew Varnell was going to die and wanted you involved. Maybe as a witness, maybe as a fall guy, if things went wrong. Either way, you're now part of a murder investigation, whether you like it or not. I don't object to being part of an investigation. I object to being suspected of participation in a crime I had no hand in committing. I'm not suspecting you of murder, but I am wondering why someone would send you that envelope. What's your connection to Varnell?" "None whatsoever. I never met the man." "Then why you?" Wolfe was silent for a moment. Then, "I have been considering that question. The most likely explanation is that whoever sent the envelope wanted me to investigate Varnell's activities before his death, to create a record of inquiry that could be used later to validate or discredit whatever conclusions the police reached. That's pretty convoluted. Murder often is." Kramer pulled out another folder. "Let's talk about the Collectors' Society. You know about it, Mrs. Varnell told you about it. And now I'm telling you that it's off limits for your investigation." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that it involves possible federal crimes, including art theft, money laundering, and customs violations. The FBI's been looking at these people for 6 months. If you go blundering around asking questions, you could compromise their investigation. Then perhaps the FBI should solve Mr. Varnell's murder." "The FBI doesn't think Varnell was murdered. They think he killed himself because he was about to be indicted." Wolfe's eyebrows rose slightly. "Indicted for what?" "Trafficking in stolen art. Specifically, pieces looted from Jewish families during the war and sold through private channels after. The FBI is building a case against the entire collector's circle. Varnell was their weakest link. They were pressuring him to turn state's evidence, and he was about to crack." "And you believe he killed himself rather than testify?" "I believe it's a possibility. Men with Varnell's background and reputation don't do well in federal prison." "Inspector," Wolfe said with unusual gentleness, "you don't believe that any more than I do. A man who's about to turn state's evidence doesn't kill himself. He runs, he negotiates, he hires lawyers. He doesn't drink scotch he's allergic to and take pills he doesn't need." Kramer was silent. Then he pulled out the final item from his folder, a photograph. He slid it across the desk. "This was found in Varnell's hotel room, hidden inside a book. It shows 5 men standing in front of the St. Regis. I've identified 4 of them: Varnell, Caldwell, Ashford, and a man named Komarov, who the FBI thinks is operating under an assumed name. The 5th man is unidentified." I looked at the photograph. It was similar to the one sent to Wolfe, except this one showed all 5 men together. 4 of them were smiling. The 5th, standing at the edge of the group, wasn't. His face was half turned away from the camera, deliberately obscured. "Who took the photograph?" Wolfe asked. "Well, unknown, but it was taken 3 weeks ago at a private event at the St. Regis. The hotel confirmed that the Collectors' Society met that night in one of their private dining rooms. And the unidentified man, We're working on it. But here's what troubles me, Wolfe. This photograph was torn. The edges match the one sent to you perfectly. That means whoever sent you your copy had access to this photograph before or during Varnell's murder. Wolfe studied the photograph for a long moment. Then he stood up, Caesar and Mars rising with him. Inspector, I appreciate your candor. In return, I will share what I learn as I learn it, within the boundaries of client confidentiality, but I will not cease my investigation merely because it inconveniences federal authorities. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking you to be careful. These people have already killed once. They won't hesitate to do it again. As we left, Kramer called after us. Wolfe, one more thing. The woman your assistant saw in the hotel reflection, the one with the red gloves, we can't find any record of her entering or leaving the hotel that night. It's like she was never there. Out on the street, with Caesar and Mars creating a protective perimeter around us, I looked at Wolfe. That's impossible. I saw her in the photograph. You saw a reflection, Wolfe corrected, which means either the hotel's security system is deficient or someone with access to those systems removed her from the record. Someone inside the hotel? Or someone with enough influence to persuade hotel management to cooperate? He looked up at the building behind us, where Kramer's office light still burned. Archie, I want you to return to the St. Regis tonight. Not officially. Use your imagination. What am I looking for? Evidence that the woman in crimson gloves exists, and evidence of why she might not want that existence recorded. We climbed back into the Heron, and Fred drove us home through rain-slicked streets while I thought about ghosts in hotel lobbies and photographs that told different stories depending on who was removed from them. Back at the Brownstone, Fritz met us with news. Saul had returned with photographs from Marina Varnell, and there was a message from a man who wouldn't leave his name but said he needed to speak with Wolfe urgently about the matter of room 913. The case was accelerating, and I had a feeling we were running out of time to solve it before someone else died. Saul Panzer was waiting in the office with a manila envelope that looked pregnant with photographs. He stood when we entered, and Diana, who'd been lying near the door, raised her head to acknowledge him before settling back down. Mr. Wolfe, Saul said. Mrs. Varnell had quite a collection. I've separated them chronologically. He spread the photographs across Wolfe's desk. There must have been 50 of them, spanning several years. Gallery openings, charity events, private dinners. Elliot Varnell appeared in most of them, distinguished and confident, often with Marina at his side. But it was the St. Regis photographs that interested Wolfe. There were 8 of them, all taken at various Collectors' Society gatherings. I recognized Caldwell and Ashford in several. A man who might have been Komarov appeared in 3, and in 2 of the photographs, standing at the edge of the frame, as if trying not to be noticed, was the same partially obscured figure from Kramer's photograph. Mrs. Varnell couldn't identify him, Saul said. She said he appeared at meetings occasionally but never spoke much. The others called him K. Not the Russian? I asked. No. She said the Russian Komarov was younger, maybe 50, with a beard. This man is older, clean-shaven, always wearing expensive suits but somehow managing to look uncomfortable in them. Wolfe picked up one of the photographs and examined it with his magnifying glass. Archie, look at this man's hands. I looked. The hands were what you noticed once Wolfe pointed them out. Workman's hands, rough and scarred, strange on someone wearing a custom suit and French cuffs. Not a collector's hands, I said. No, a craftsman's hands. Someone who works with tools or materials requiring physical labor. A forger, Saul suggested. Possibly, or a restorer, or someone with expertise in authenticating artwork through physical examination rather than paperwork. Wolfe set down the photograph. Saul, I want you to take these photographs to your contact at the FBI. Find out if they've identified this man, and if so, what his role is in the Collectors' Society. They won't tell me anything official. Then make it unofficially worth their while. I need that information by morning. After Saul left, Wolfe looked at me. The message. Who called? Fritz said he sounded elderly, maybe 70, spoke carefully, like English wasn't his first language. He said he has information about the Mirror of Elysium and wants to meet you tomorrow afternoon. Did he leave a number? No. He said he'd come here at 2 o'clock and would wait on the stoop if you were busy. He made a point of saying he wouldn't come inside. Afraid of the dogs? or afraid of being seen entering the Brownstone? Wolfe nodded slowly. Very well. Now about your evening plans. You'll need to visit the St. Regis quietly and unofficially to find evidence of the woman in crimson gloves. Breaking and entering is illegal. I'm not suggesting you break anything. I'm suggesting you enter creatively. He pulled out a slip of paper and wrote a name and number. Call this person. She's a former chambermaid at the St. Regis who left under circumstances that made the hotel uncomfortable. She may be willing to provide access in exchange for appropriate compensation. I looked at the name, Iris Chen. How much compensation? Whatever it takes to get you inside the security office. I want to see the surveillance footage from Wednesday night, particularly the cameras covering the 9th floor and the lobby entrances. Kramer said there was no record of the woman. Kramer said, the hotel has no record. That may simply mean the hotel has no record. They're willing to share with the police. Hidden records are another matter. I called Iris Chen. She answered on the 3rd ring, listened to what I wanted, and quoted a price that would have bought a decent used car. I agreed, and she told me to meet her at a service entrance on East 55th Street at midnight, which gave me 6 hours to kill and a dinner to enjoy. Fritz had outdone himself. Roasted duck with cherry sauce, wild rice with chestnuts, endive salad with his special dressing, and a chocolate soufflé that should have been illegal. Wolfe ate with the focused attention of a man for whom food is one of life's reliable pleasures. The dogs arranged themselves around the dining room, patient and watchful, occasionally rewarded with small offerings from Wolfe's plate. At 11:30, I left the Brownstone wearing dark clothes and carrying tools that I wouldn't want to explain to a police officer. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting streetlights in long golden streaks. Iris Chen was waiting at the service entrance, a small woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a cigarette that she stubbed out when I approached. You're late, she said. I'm on time. You're early. Same thing. She produced a key card. This will get you into the service corridors. The security office is on the 2nd floor, room 217. The night guard is named Patrick, and he takes his break between midnight and 12:15 to smoke in the loading dock. That's your window. What about cameras in the corridors? There's a blind spot near the freight elevator. I'll show you. She led me through a maze of service corridors, the hidden infrastructure that keeps luxury hotels running smoothly while remaining invisible to guests. We passed laundry rooms, storage areas, and staff break rooms where tired people sat drinking coffee and smoking. The security office was exactly where she said it would be. Through the small window in the door, I could see Patrick gathering his coat and cigarettes, preparing for his break. Chen and I waited in the shadows until he left. Then she used another key card to open the door. 15 minutes, she said. After that, you're on your own. The security office was a small room lined with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the hotel. I found the controls and started pulling up footage from Wednesday night, starting at 10 p.m. The 9th floor cameras showed nothing unusual until 11:45, when a figure in a dark coat and hat emerged from the stairwell and walked to room 9. She knocked. The door opened. She went inside. At 12:20, she emerged and walked back to the stairwell. Still no clear view of her face. I switched to the lobby cameras. There she was at 11:30, entering through the 5th Avenue entrance. But the camera angle was wrong, blocked by a column at exactly the moment she should have been most visible. Not impossible, just very lucky. Or very carefully planned. I was about to switch to another camera when I noticed something in the footage. At 11:27, 3 minutes before the woman entered, a man in a hotel uniform walked past that same column carrying a stepladder. He climbed up, apparently adjusting something on the column's decorative capital, then climbed down and walked away. I backed up the footage and froze it when I got a clear view of his face. It was K, the unidentified man from the photographs. He hadn't been adjusting the decorative capital. He'd been adjusting the camera angle. I downloaded the footage onto a thumb drive I'd brought for exactly this purpose, then started searching for other cameras. I found what I was looking for on the service entrance camera. The woman in the crimson gloves leaving through a basement exit at 12:35, her face finally visible as she looked back over her shoulder. It was Marina Varnell. I was copying that footage when I heard footsteps in the corridor. Not Patrick's heavy tread. These were lighter, quicker. I glanced at my watch, 12:12. Patrick wasn't due back for 3 more minutes. The door handle turned. I did the only thing I could think of. I dropped to behind the desk and hoped whoever was entering wouldn't look too carefully. The door opened. Through the gap beneath the desk, I could see expensive shoes, handmade Italian leather, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The shoes walked slowly around the room, paused at the monitors, then moved toward the desk. A hand reached down and picked up something I'd left on the desk, my pen. "Mr. Goodwin," a voice said, elderly, accented, somehow both cultured and menacing. "There's no need to hide. I know you're here." I stood up slowly, keeping my hands visible. The man facing me was about 70, thin, with white hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen most of human cruelty and found it tiresome. He was wearing a dark suit and holding my pen as if it were evidence. "Let me guess," I said. "You're Kay." "My name is Kaspar Mendel. I believe Mr. Wolfe is expecting me tomorrow afternoon, but circumstances have accelerated our timeline." He gestured to the monitors. "You've discovered that Mrs. Varnell was in room 913 the night her husband died. What you haven't yet discovered is why. Are you going to tell me?" "That depends on whether Mr. Wolfe is willing to listen. But first we should leave. Patrick will return in less than a minute, and I would prefer he not find us here." "Why should I trust you?" "Because if I intended you harm, Mr. Goodwin, you would already be harmed. Come, I have a car waiting, and we have much to discuss." I considered my options, which basically came down to trusting this man or trying to fight my way past him, and at 70 he looked like he could still win that fight. I grabbed my thumb drive and followed him out into the corridor. We made it to the service entrance just as Patrick returned from his smoke break. Mendel's car was a black Mercedes, old but immaculate, with a driver who didn't look at me when I got in. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To the Brownstone. I was going to wait until tomorrow, but after watching you break into the security office with such admirable determination, I decided to accelerate our conversation." He smiled slightly. "Besides, Mr. Wolfe prefers visitors who arrive with information rather than questions. I'm bringing him both." We drove through empty Manhattan streets while I tried to figure out whether I'd just been rescued or kidnapped. When we pulled up in front of the Brownstone, all 3 front windows were lit. Wolfe was still up, probably having his last beer of the evening in the office. Mendel followed me up the steps. Before I could use my key, the door opened. Fritz, looking worried but unsurprised. "Mr. Wolfe is expecting you both," he said. In the office, Wolfe was sitting behind his desk, with all 5 Dobermans arranged around him in a defensive formation. He looked at Mendel for a long moment, then nodded. "Mr. Mendel, you're early. Time is a luxury neither of us can currently afford." Mendel sat in the red leather chair, completely unfazed by Caesar's low growl. "I've come to tell you about the Mirror of Elysium, about Elliot Varnell's murder, and about why Marina Varnell was in room 9113 the night her husband died." "I'm listening," Wolfe said. "First, you should know that there will be another death, probably within the next 48 hours, unless you can stop it, which is why I'm here." Outside, thunder rumbled. Apollo lifted his head, ears forward, alert to something we couldn't yet hear. "Tell us everything," Wolfe said, "from the beginning." And Mendel did. Kaspar Mendel leaned back in the red leather chair and steepled his fingers, those rough craftsman's fingers that looked wrong with the French cuffs. "The Mirror of Elysium," he began, "is not a mirror in the traditional sense. It's a triptych painted in the late 15th century by an unknown Flemish master. The central panel depicts a mirror held by an angel, reflecting not the viewer's face, but their soul. Legend says that looking into it reveals one's true nature, saint or sinner, worthy or damned." "Superstition," Wolfe said. "Of course, but valuable superstition. The triptych disappeared in 1943, looted from a private collection in Amsterdam belonging to the Vandermeer family. They were Jewish art dealers who died at Sobibor. The triptych was never recovered. Until 6 months ago, when it appeared on the black market. Not officially, you understand. Just rumors, whispers in the collecting community that the mirror had been found. The Collectors' Society was formed specifically to acquire it. I had been standing near the window, watching the empty street, but now I turned. Why? If it's just a painting... It's not just a painting, Mr. Goodwin. It's history with a receipt. The Vandermeer family kept meticulous records of their collection. The mirror's provenance is absolutely traceable. Anyone caught possessing it would face criminal charges for trafficking in Holocaust looted art, but its estimated value is between $15 and $20 million. Wolfe opened a bottle of beer, poured it carefully, and drank. Continue. The Society Caldwell, Ashford, Komarov, Varnell, and myself pooled our resources to purchase the mirror through a series of intermediaries. The total cost was $8 million. The plan was to hold it for 2 years, create false provenance documents, then sell it through legitimate auction houses, splitting the profit. Forgery, I said. Art restoration. Mendel corrected with a slight smile. I'm very good at creating documents that appear authentic. That was my role in the society. I authenticate, I restore, and when necessary, I forge. And Mr. Varnell's role? Elliot was the respectable face. His gallery provided legitimacy. He also had connections in Europe that made moving pieces easier. Wolfe set down his beer. What went wrong? Everything. 3 weeks ago, we received the mirror. It was delivered to room 913 for authentication. I examined it and confirmed it was genuine. But Elliot was troubled. He'd been researching the Vandermeer family and discovered living descendants, grandchildren who escaped to England before the war. The mirror should have gone to them. He wanted to return it. He threatened to expose the entire operation if we didn't. Caldwell and Ashford refused. They'd mortgaged everything to fund the purchase. Komarov? Mendel paused. Komarov said Elliot was becoming a liability. And you? Wolfe asked. I agreed with Elliot. The mirror was blood money. But I'm a coward, Mr. Wolfe. I said nothing. He looked down at his hands. Elliot arranged a meeting at the St. Regis for Wednesday night. He said he was going to the FBI, unless we agreed to return the mirror to the Vandermeer heirs. He gave us until midnight to decide. Marina knew about this meeting. I said, yes. Elliot told her what he planned. She was terrified, afraid they'd kill him, so she came to the hotel to warn him, to convince him to run instead of confronting them. Mendel looked at me. That's why she was in room 913. She arrived before the meeting, argued with Elliot, and left. What she didn't know was that someone was already there waiting. Who killed him? Wolfe asked quietly. I don't know, but I can tell you who it wasn't. It wasn't Marina. She left at 12:20, and the medical examiner said Elliot died between midnight and 3 a.m. It wasn't me. I was at an exhibition in Boston until Thursday morning with 100 witnesses. I don't think it was Caldwell or Ashford. They're thieves, but not killers. Komarov, I said. Mendel nodded slowly. Mikhail Komarov is many things. Dealer, smuggler, forger. But most importantly, he's practical. Elliot threatened their $8 million investment. Komarov would see that as a business problem, requiring a business solution. Where is the mirror now? Wolfe asked. I don't know. It was moved from the St. Regis the day Elliot died. Komarov arranged the transfer, but he didn't tell any of us where it went. And the photograph sent to me. That was my doing. Mendel met Wolfe's eyes without flinching. I couldn't go to the police. I'm implicated in too many crimes. But I knew Elliot was in danger, and I wanted someone investigating before he died. I hoped that if you were involved, the truth would come out regardless of what happened. You expected him to die. I feared it. I was right to fear it. Wolfe was silent for a long time. The Dobermans, sensing the tension in the room, had moved closer to his chair, a tight circle of loyalty and protection. Outside, the thunder was moving closer. Mr. Mendel, Wolfe said finally, you mentioned another death. Who? Gerald Ashford. Komarov approached him yesterday with a proposal. If Ashford helps dispose of the mirror quietly, Komarov will give him a larger share of the profit, enough to save his career and possibly keep him out of federal prison. But Ashford is also a liability. He knows too much, and he's weak. Komarov will eliminate him as soon as he's no longer useful. When? I don't know exactly, but Komarov is meeting Ashford tomorrow night, Friday, at a warehouse in Red Hook, ostensibly to show him the mirror and discuss the disposal plan. I think it's an execution disguised as a business meeting. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him everything Mr. Mendel has told us and advise him to provide protection for Gerald Ashford immediately. You think Kramer will believe it? I think he'll investigate. That's sufficient. While I called Kramer, who answered on the first ring with a vocabulary that would have impressed a longshoreman, Wolfe questioned Mendel about details. the warehouse location, the time of the meeting, Komarov's habits and associates. When I hung up, Kramer had agreed to send officers to watch Ashford, but he'd made it clear he thought we were chasing shadows. The FBI had already cleared Ashford in Varnell's death, and the official verdict was still suicide. He doesn't believe you, I told Wolfe. He will. After Gerald Ashford dies tomorrow night, Inspector Kramer will become very interested in what we have to say. Unfortunately, that will be too late for Mr. Ashford. So what do we do? Wolfe was quiet, his eyes closed, thinking. Then he did something I'd only seen him do a handful of times in all the years I'd known him. We will go to the warehouse ourselves. I stared at him. You want to leave the Brownstone? Voluntarily? To go to Brooklyn? I want to prevent a murder and identify a killer. If that requires travel, then I will travel. It also requires walking, climbing, possibly running. I am aware of my limitations, Archie. That is why we will bring Caesar, Mars, and Apollo. They will serve as both deterrent and protection. He looked at Mendel. You will guide us to the warehouse and point out Mikhail Komarov. After that, you may leave or stay as you choose. I'll stay, Mendel said. I've been a coward long enough. Very well. We depart tomorrow at 8 p.m. Bring nothing that could be used as a weapon. I want no misunderstandings about our intentions. He looked at me. Archie, call Fred. Tell him to have the heron ready, and tell him to bring bolt cutters. Warehouse locks are typically industrial. After Mendel left, driven home by Fritz, who would bring back the Mercedes in the morning, I sat in the office with Wolfe and went over the plan one more time. You realize this is a terrible idea, I said. I realize it's a necessary idea. We have no legal authority. We're essentially breaking into a warehouse to confront an armed smuggler who's already killed once. We won't be alone. Inspector Kramer will have officers in the area, even if he doesn't believe they're necessary. And we have Caesar, Mars, and Apollo, 3 Dobermans who are considerably more intimidating than most armed smugglers. What if Komarov doesn't show? What if it's a trap? Then we will learn something valuable about Mr. Mendel's trustworthiness. Wolfe finished his beer and stood up. Go to bed, Archie. Tomorrow will be demanding, and I prefer you alert rather than exhausted. I went upstairs but didn't sleep. I kept thinking about Wolfe leaving his sanctuary, walking into danger for a case that hadn't even paid enough to cover expenses. We had Marina Varnell's check, sure, but Wolfe was taking a personal risk that money couldn't justify, unless it wasn't about money. I thought about Mendel's story, a painting stolen from murdered Jews, collectors who wanted to profit from that tragedy, and one man who tried to do the right thing and died for it. Maybe Wolfe saw something in that story that reminded him why he'd become a detective in the first place, not for the money or the intellectual challenge, but because someone had to stand up for the victims who couldn't stand up for themselves. Or maybe I was overthinking it, and he just wanted to solve the damn puzzle before someone else died. Either way, tomorrow was going to be interesting. Friday morning broke grey and cold. I came downstairs to find Wolfe already in the office, the remains of Fritz's breakfast on a tray, and all 5 Dobermans arranged around him in what I'd come to think of as their strategy formation. Change of plans, he said before I could speak. We're going to the St. Regis first, before the warehouse. Why? Because I've been thinking about Marina Varnell. She lied about being in room 913 the night her husband died. She sent you to investigate the hotel, knowing you'd find evidence of a woman in crimson gloves, but likely not identifying her. And she hired me immediately after his death, before the police had even finished their initial investigation. That suggests either remarkable presence of mind or premeditation. I poured myself coffee. You think she killed him? I think she knows more than she's told us, and I think the key to understanding what happened is in room 9113 itself. Mendel's story explains motive and opportunity, but it doesn't explain method. How did Komarov, or whoever killed Varnell, force him to take pills and drink scotch? Threatened him. Elliot Varnell was prepared to go to the FBI despite threats to his life. A man that determined doesn't suddenly decide to commit suicide because someone points a gun at him. No, there's something else, something in that room that explains how the murder was accomplished. The police searched it. The police searched for evidence of foul play. I want to search for evidence of method. He stood up, causing a ripple of movement among the dogs. Call Mendel. Tell him we need access to room 913, and we need it this afternoon. The hotel won't just let us walk in. They will. if we tell them we've discovered evidence that someone tampered with their security system to facilitate murder. Hotel managers are remarkably cooperative when their hotel's reputation is at stake. 2 hours later, we pulled up to the St. Regis in the Heron. Wolfe emerged slowly, Caesar and Mars flanking him, while Fred waited with the car. I'd called ahead and spoken to Malcolm Hartwell, who'd been appalled to learn about the camera tampering and eager to cooperate with our investigation. The sight of Nero Wolfe walking through the St. Regis lobby, all 270 pounds of him, accompanied by 2 massive Dobermans, created a sensation. Guests stared. Staff members whispered. One elderly woman actually applauded, apparently thinking we were some kind of performance art. Wolfe ignored all of it, moving through the marble halls with determined dignity, his eyes fixed on the elevators. Hartwell met us on the 9th floor, nervous but professional. "Mr. Wolfe, the room is exactly as we left it after the police finished. I've instructed housekeeping not to clean until you've completed your examination." "Thank you. We won't be long." Inside room 9113, Wolfe moved slowly through the space, studying details that the police had either missed or not found significant. He examined the windows, locked from the inside. The bathroom, no evidence of forced entry or struggle. The bed, made but not slept in. Finally, he turned to the couch where Varnell had died. "Archie, where exactly was the Scotch glass when you examined the room?" "On the side table, to the left of where the body was found." "And the pill bottle?" "Next to the glass." Wolfe knelt, no small feat for a man his size, and examined the carpet beneath the couch. Caesar and Mars watched with alert interest, as if understanding that their master was hunting something invisible. "There," Wolfe said, pointing. "That stain you noticed. It's not from the Scotch glass on the table. It's from a second glass that was removed after Varnell died." I knelt beside him and looked. Now that he pointed it out, I could see he was right. The stain was too far from the table to have come from the glass we'd seen. "2 glasses," I said. "Varnell was drinking with someone." "Not drinking. Being drugged. Look at the stain more closely. It has an oily sheen, characteristic of certain sedatives when mixed with alcohol. So someone sat here with Varnell, got him to drink drugged scotch, waited for him to pass out, then staged the suicide." "Exactly. But who? And how did they enter and leave without being seen?" I stood up and walked to the door, thinking. The woman in crimson gloves, Marina, had been here earlier, but she'd left before Varnell died, unless she'd come back. Or unless... "What if she never left?" I said. Wolfe looked at me. "The security footage shows her leaving at 12:20, but Mendel already demonstrated that the cameras can be manipulated. What if the footage of her leaving was from a different time, earlier in the evening, and someone looped it to make it appear she left when she didn't? Then she would have been in this room when her husband was murdered. Or she was the one who murdered him." Wolfe was silent, thinking. "Then, call Mrs. Varnell. Tell her I need to see her immediately. Tell her we've discovered evidence about her husband's death that she needs to hear in person. And if she refuses, then we'll know she has something to hide." Marina arrived an hour later, still in black, still wearing those crimson gloves. She entered the room warily, her eyes moving from Wolfe to the couch to the windows. "Mrs. Varnell," Wolfe said from his position by the windows, "thank you for coming. I need you to tell me the truth about Wednesday night. Not the version you told me in my office, but what actually happened." Her face went white. "I've told you everything. You told me you left this room at 12:20. The security footage confirms that, but you didn't tell me you came back." "I didn't." "Mrs. Varnell, your husband was drugged with sedatives mixed into scotch he couldn't drink because of his liver condition. Someone sat with him on this couch, watched him lose consciousness, then placed pills in his hand and a glass on the table to simulate suicide. That person had to be someone he trusted absolutely, someone he would drink with despite his medical restrictions." Marina's composure finally cracked. She sank into the nearest chair, her face in her hands. "He made me," she whispered. "He said it was the only way." Wolfe and I exchanged glances. "Explain," Wolfe said gently. "Elliot knew they were going to kill him. He knew it from the moment he threatened to go to the FBI. Komarov told him that night, if Elliot exposed the mirror operation, his death would look like an accident, and I'd be next." She looked up, tears running down her face. "So Elliot came up with a plan. He'd stage his own suicide before they could murder him. That way, his death couldn't be blamed on me, and the FBI would have no reason to suspect I knew anything about the mirror. And you agreed? What choice did I have? Let him die violently? Let them kill me too? Her voice was desperate. He said if we made it look like suicide, the police would investigate less carefully. He'd write a note confessing to art fraud, destroying his reputation but keeping me safe, and it would give the FBI time to build their case against the others without me being targeted. But there was no note, I said. He was going to write it. He drank the scotch. He didn't care about his liver anymore and took one of my sleeping pills. He said he'd write the note once the drugs started working, make it look shaky and desperate. But the drugs worked too fast. He tried to write, but he couldn't. He looked at me and then he closed his eyes and then... She stopped, unable to continue. Wolfe was quiet for a long moment. Outside, I could hear the muted sounds of Manhattan, car horns, distant sirens, the endless rhythm of the city. Mrs. Varnell, Wolfe said, your husband did not commit suicide. He was murdered. But I was here. I gave him the pills. I watched him die. You gave him one pill. Someone else gave him the rest. After you left the room thinking he'd taken only a sleeping aid. They waited until you were gone, then forced additional pills down his throat while he was unconscious, enough to ensure death. Marina stared at him, but the security footage was manipulated. You left at 12:20, as the footage shows. But someone else was already in this room, hiding. They waited until you left, then killed your husband while he was defenseless from the sedative you'd given him. Who? She whispered. I believe it was Mikhail Komarov. But to prove it, we'll need to take one more risk. He looked at me. Archie, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we're staging a meeting tonight in room 9113, a memorial gathering for Elliot Varnell. Tell him I'm inviting all the members of the Collectors Society, and tell him he should have officers standing by. You think Komarov will confess? I think he'll make a mistake, and when he does, we'll be ready. At 7 o'clock that Friday evening, room 913 at the St. Regis Hotel was full of people who didn't want to be there. Horace Caldwell sat stiffly in an armchair near the windows, his department store empire crumbling and his face showing it. Gerald Ashford stood by the door, nervous as a rabbit, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Kaspar Mendel had positioned himself near the writing desk, his craftsman's hands folded, his expression unreadable. And Mikhail Komarov, the Russian who wasn't quite Russian, sat on the couch where Elliot Varnell had died, looking comfortable in a way that made my skin crawl. Wolfe occupied the room's best chair, positioned so he could see everyone. Caesar and Mars lay at his feet. Apollo stationed himself near the door, alert to any sudden movements. Inspector Kramer stood in the corner with two plainclothes officers, looking like a man who'd been dragged to a party he didn't want to attend. Marina Varnell sat in the shadows near the window, her crimson gloves bright against her black dress. Gentlemen, Wolfe began, thank you for accepting my invitation to discuss the death of Elliot Varnell. I don't see what there is to discuss, Caldwell said irritably. The man killed himself. The police said so. The police said the evidence suggested suicide. I'm here to tell you the evidence lied. Wolfe looked at each of them in turn. Elliot Varnell was murdered in this room 5 nights ago by someone in this room. I intend to prove who and how. Komarov smiled slightly, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Bold claims, Mr. Wolfe. Can you support them? I can, but first, let me establish what we know for certain. The 5 of you, Caldwell, Ashford, Komarov, Mendel, and Varnell, formed a collectors' society to purchase a stolen artwork called the Mirror of Elysium. You paid $8 million for a painting worth perhaps $20 million, planning to create false provenance and sell it through legitimate channels. That's speculation, Ashford said, but his voice shook. It's fact. Mr. Mendel has provided documentation of the purchase, the authentication process, and the storage locations. The FBI will find that documentation quite enlightening. Mendel nodded. I've already turned over copies to federal investigators. Caldwell's face went purple. You fool, you've destroyed us all. Mr. Varnell destroyed the operation when he threatened to expose it. Wolfe continued. He'd learned about the Vandermeer heirs and wanted the mirror returned to them. This created a problem. You'd all invested heavily in the purchase. Exposure meant criminal charges, financial ruin, and possibly prison. So he killed himself rather than face the consequences, Komarov said smoothly, a coward's way out. On the contrary, he was preparing to show great courage by going to the FBI. That's why he had to be silenced. Wolfe looked at Marina. Mrs. Varnell, please tell us what happened Wednesday night. Marina told her story. The plan to fake suicide, the sleeping pill, watching Elliot die. When she finished, the room was silent. So she killed him, Ashford said, relief evident in his voice. Case solved. We can all go home. Mrs. Varnell gave her husband a sedative, yes, but she didn't kill him. The autopsy report showed lethal levels of barbiturates in his system, far more than one sleeping pill would account for. Someone administered additional pills after Mrs. Varnell left the room. Who? Caldwell demanded. Someone who was already here, waiting. Someone who knew about the plan to fake suicide and saw an opportunity to turn it into actual murder. Wolfe paused. Someone who had tampered with the security cameras to create false records of Mrs. Varnell's movements. Mendel, Komarov said immediately. He's the technician. He could manipulate the cameras. True. But Mr. Mendel was in Boston the night of the murder, with 100 witnesses. No, the person who manipulated the cameras had to be someone with constant access to the hotel's security systems. Someone who worked here. I saw where he was going. The man in the hotel uniform. The one adjusting the camera angles. Exactly. And who would have both the technical skill to manipulate surveillance equipment and the motivation to protect an $8 million investment? Wolfe looked directly at Komarov. You hired someone to adjust the cameras and to hide in this room until Mrs. Varnell left. Once she was gone, that person emerged, forced additional pills down Elliot Varnell's throat while he was unconscious, and left using service corridors where cameras had been strategically disabled. Komarov's smile never wavered. Fascinating theory. Can you prove any of it? I can prove the cameras were manipulated. Mr. Goodwin retrieved footage showing a hotel employee adjusting camera angles precisely before Mrs. Varnell's arrival. I can also prove that the pattern of carpet staining indicates 2 glasses were used, not 1, and that the second glass was removed from the room. Most significantly, I can prove that you met with that hotel employee yesterday to provide final payment for services rendered. Kramer spoke for the first time. We've had you under surveillance, Komarov. Yesterday afternoon you met with a man named Patrick Sullivan, night security guard at the St. Regis. You gave him an envelope. He gave you a key card. We arrested Sullivan 2 hours ago, and he's already confessed to tampering with the cameras and hiding in room 950 that night. Komarov's smile finally faded. He didn't confess to murder, Kramer continued. Says he left the room before Varnell died, but he did confess to being paid $25,000 to help stage what he thought was a suicide. Your money, your plan. Sullivan is lying, Komarov said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Sullivan is cooperating, Kramer corrected, and when we matched the fingerprints we found on the pill bottle to yours, the ones you left when you forced those pills down Varnell's throat, his cooperation will be all we need to convict you of first-degree murder. There was a long silence. Then Komarov stood up slowly, his hand moving toward his jacket pocket. Apollo moved first, a dark blur of muscle and teeth, covering the distance between the door and the couch in less than a second. Komarov froze, the Dobermans growl low and menacing, inches from his throat. Don't, I said quietly, my hand on my own pocket where I'd been carrying brass knuckles. The dog's faster than you, and he's not interested in negotiations. Kramer's officers had their guns out, trained on Komarov. Slowly, carefully, he raised his hands. It was just business, he said finally. Varnell was going to cost us millions. I gave him a chance to walk away. He refused. So you killed him, Marina said, her voice breaking. You made me watch my husband die thinking I'd helped him escape, when really, I'd just made him vulnerable to you. You should thank me, Komarov said with shocking coldness. I saved you from federal prosecution. Your husband's suicide was the perfect cover. Enough, Wolfe said. The single word, spoken quietly, somehow silenced the room. Inspector Kramer, remove this man from my sight. They took Komarov away, Apollo watching until he was gone. The other collectors, Caldwell, Ashford, Mendel, would face their own reckonings with federal investigators, but tonight they were free to go. After they left, Only Wolfe, Kramer, Marina and I remained in the room. "The mirror," Kramer said. "Where is it?" "According to Mendel's records, it's in a climate-controlled storage facility in Queens, registered to one of Komarov's shell companies. Your colleagues at the FBI will want to recover it and return it to the Vandermeer heirs." Marina stood up, her composure restored but her eyes still haunted. "Mr. Wolfe, will I be charged?" "That's for the district attorney to decide. But you didn't kill your husband, and you cooperated with the investigation. I'll testify to both facts if necessary." "Thank you." She walked to the door, then turned back. "He really was going to do the right thing, wasn't he? Elliot, he was going to return the mirror." "Yes," Wolfe said gently. "He tried to do the right thing, and he died for it. That makes him braver than most of us." After she left, Kramer lit a cigar and looked at Wolfe. "You know, if Sullivan hadn't confessed, we'd have had a hard time proving Komarov was even in the room. But he did confess. The pressure of imminent arrest and the promise of reduced charges made him quite talkative. You knew he'd been arrested before you staged this gathering." "I suspected. You're a competent investigator, Inspector. Once I pointed you toward Sullivan, I was confident you'd reach the correct conclusion." Kramer snorted. "One of these days, Wolfe, your confidence is going to get you killed." "Perhaps. But today is not that day." We left the St. Regis at 9 o'clock, Wolfe moving through the lobby with Caesar, Mars and Apollo creating a protective barrier around him. Outside, Fred had the heron waiting. "Home," Wolfe said, settling into his seat with a grunt of relief. "I've had quite enough of hotel rooms and murderers for one evening." Back at the Brownstone, Fritz had dinner waiting. Cold chicken, potato salad, fresh bread and apple pie that made my earlier hotel coffee and nerves feel like a distant memory. We ate in the dining room, Wolfe with obvious pleasure, the dogs arranged around us in their usual careful geometry. Afterward, we settled in the office, Wolfe with his beer, me with my coffee, and the comfortable silence that comes after a case is closed but before the paperwork begins. "You were right," I said eventually, "about Komarov, about Sullivan, about the cameras and the second glass." "Of course I was right. You were also lucky. If Marina hadn't confessed to being in the room, we might never have figured out the timing. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." Mrs. Varnell's confession merely confirmed what the evidence already suggested. "And the mirror. You think they'll really return it to the Vandermeer heirs?" "I think the FBI will attempt to do so. Whether they'll succeed is another matter. But at least the attempt will be made, which is more than would have happened if Varnell's death had remained classified as suicide." I thought about that, about a man who'd tried to do the right thing and paid for it with his life. "You think Marina will be okay?" "I think she'll carry the weight of what happened for the rest of her life, whether she's charged with a crime or not. Guilt doesn't require a conviction." We sat in comfortable silence for a while longer. Through the windows, I could see October rain starting again, turning West 35th Street into a river of reflected light. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 11. Tomorrow Kramer would want a full statement. The FBI would want to interview Mendel about the Collectors Society and the storage facility. Marina Varnell would need to decide whether to hire a criminal attorney or hope for prosecutorial mercy. But tonight, the case was solved. The killer was in custody. The mirror would be returned to its rightful owners, or at least their descendants. Wolfe finished his beer, set down the glass, and reached down to stroke Caesar's head. The big Doberman leaned into the touch, content. "Archie," Wolfe said, "I've been thinking. Dangerous pastime. About the dogs, about security, about the fact that twice now, once with the envelope and once with Sullivan's visit, someone has managed to approach the Brownstone without proper challenge. The dogs spotted both of them. After they'd already reached our door, I want an early warning system, something that gives us notice before visitors arrive, not after." "What did you have in mind?" "I'm considering a system of outdoor cameras, discreet but comprehensive, with feeds directly to the office." I stared at him. "You want to install security cameras? You who just helped solve a murder that involved manipulated security footage." "The principle of technology is sound. It was the application that was criminal. It'll cost a fortune. Then we'll earn a fortune. We've solved murders before. We'll solve them again." He looked at me, his eyes unreadable. "I won't leave the Brownstone undefended, Archie. Not while there are people like Komarov in the world. I understood. This case had reminded both of us, that evil doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, wearing expensive suits and polite smiles, and by the time you realize what you're dealing with, someone's already dead. I'll get estimates, I said. Thank you. Thunder rolled across Manhattan, closer now. Apollo raised his head, listened, then settled back down. Whatever he'd heard, it wasn't a threat. Just the city doing what cities do, living and moving, and occasionally breaking into violence. One more thing, I said. The check from Marina Varnell. We should probably return it. She's going to need money for lawyers. Wolfe was silent for a long moment. Then, keep it. She hired us to find out who killed her husband. We did. The contract is fulfilled. You're going soft. I'm being practical. If she's charged and we've returned her money, it suggests we believed she was guilty. If we keep it, we're treating her as a client who fulfilled her obligations. That's almost empathetic. Don't push your luck. The phone rang. I answered it, listened for a few seconds, then hung up. That was Lon Cohen. He wants to know if we're interested in another case, something about a missing manuscript and a dead publisher. Tell him no. Now, I already did. Good. We sat in silence again, the rain falling harder now, drumming against the bulletproof windows that had been installed after someone took a shot at Wolfe 2 years ago. The dogs, all 5 of them now, Diana and Minerva having joined their brothers, arranged themselves around the office in their usual vigilant repose. You know what bothers me, I said. Many things, I'm sure. The photograph. The one sent to you before Varnell died. Mendel says he sent it, but why tear out the other people? Why not just send the whole thing and let you identify everyone? Wolfe opened his eyes, because he wanted me focused on Varnell specifically. If I'd seen all 5 members of the society, I might have investigated them all equally. By isolating Varnell, Mendel ensured I'd pay particular attention to him. You think Mendel suspected Varnell would be killed? I think he feared it. He knew Komarov was dangerous, knew the stakes were high, and knew that Varnell was the weak link in their criminal enterprise, so he took precautions, hiring me without my knowledge, creating evidence that would survive if Varnell didn't. That's pretty calculating. Mr. Mendel spent decades forging documents and authentication certificates. Calculating is his nature. Wolfe paused, but he also tried to save a life. That counts for something. Will he go to prison? Almost certainly. But his cooperation will earn him consideration from the prosecutors. He may spend less time behind bars than he deserves. Is that justice? It's pragmatism. The justice system rarely achieves perfection. Sometimes the best we can hope for is approximate truth and negotiated consequences. Outside, the thunder moved on, heading east toward the river. The rain continued, softer now, washing the city clean, or as clean as Manhattan ever gets. Wolfe stood up, signaling that the evening was over. Caesar and Mars rose with him, ready to follow him to his bedroom for the night. Apollo, Minerva, and Diana would remain on the lower floors, rotating guard duty according to some schedule they'd worked out among themselves. Good night, Archie, Wolfe said. Good night. He paused at the door. This was a good case. Difficult, but good. We prevented a second murder, recovered a stolen masterpiece, and brought a killer to justice. Not every case ends so well. You planning to leave the Brownstone more often? Take the dogs on regular field trips? Absolutely not. Tonight was an aberration, born of necessity. Tomorrow I return to my orchids and my routine, and I hope to remain undisturbed for at least a month. You know that won't happen. I can hope. He left. I heard the elevator groan upward, heard his bedroom door close, heard the house settle into its nighttime rhythms. I sat at my desk for a while longer, thinking about the case, about Elliot Varnell's attempt to do the right thing, about Marina's haunted eyes and crimson gloves, about Caspar Mendel, who'd been both criminal and witness, neither hero nor complete villain, about a painting called the Mirror of Elysium that reflected not faces but souls, and about whether any of us would like what we saw if we looked into it honestly. Eventually, I went upstairs to bed. Through my window, I could see the city lights reflecting off wet streets, could hear the distant wail of sirens and the rumble of late-night traffic. Tomorrow there would be reports to file, statements to give, money to count. Tomorrow, Inspector Kramer would probably yell at us for complicating his investigation while simultaneously solving it. Tomorrow, the newspapers would cover the story, and Lon Cohen would call looking for details. But tonight, the Brownstone was quiet. The dogs were on watch. Wolfe was probably reading in bed, one hand absently stroking whichever dog had followed him upstairs. Fritz was in the kitchen, preparing tomorrow's breakfast, and I was where I belonged, in a house that felt more like home than anywhere else I'd ever lived. Somewhere in Queens, a painting looted from murdered Jews waited to be returned to their descendants. In a jail cell, Mikhail Komarov contemplated life in prison for a murder he'd committed over $8 million and a man's stubborn conscience. And in a townhouse somewhere in Manhattan, Marina Varnell probably sat alone in the dark, wearing those crimson gloves, wondering if she'd ever stop seeing her husband's face in the moment he closed his eyes and never opened them again. Justice had been served, more or less. The truth had been found, more or less. The case was closed, more or less. I turned off the light and went to sleep, listening to the rain and the sound of Diana's claws clicking softly on the floor downstairs as she made her rounds, keeping watch over us all.